They vanished in a 1987 storm. 12 years later, what was found under the ridge finally told the truth. They were supposed to come home Sunday night. That was the plan. A weekend in the Sierra Nevadas. 3 boys, a blue tent, a Polaroid camera, and the kind of confidence only 17-year-olds have when summer is just beginning and the world feels like it's cracking open just for them. Liam Foster, Caleb Moore, and Noah Reyes were not the kind of kids who ran away. They were the kind who made promises, who said, "Don't worry, Mom," and meant it. But the mountains don't care about promises. And sometimes the silence that follows a storm is louder than anything that came before. People in Bishop still remember the way that Friday morning felt. Clean skies, no clouds, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper. The boys had packed Liam's old pickup by 8 a.m., stuffing it with sleeping bags, fishing rods, trail mix, and more Polaroid film than they'd ever use. They were laughing as they argued over what music to bring. Noah wanted silence. He said nature was enough. Liam wanted Springsteen. Caleb brought cassette mixtapes he'd made himself, carefully labeled with Sharpie and teenage sentiment. It wasn't just a camping trip. It was a goodbye they hadn't yet admitted out loud. Liam was heading to film school in Los Angeles. Caleb had signed up for forestry college up north. Noah hadn't told anyone, but he was enlisting in the Marines. They didn't know how to say goodbye, so they didn't. They just called it one last trip. Liam's mother, Evelyn Foster, hovered more than usual that morning. She checked the cooler 3 times, handed them 2 extra flashlights, kissed her son twice. "Call me Sunday night," she said. "I promise," Liam replied, grinning. "We'll be back before dark." Caleb's dad stood back quietly, watching them load gear. When he handed Caleb the old camping knife they'd used since Caleb was 10, he only said, "Don't lose yourself up there." Noah's goodbye was more subdued. His brother Marcus was already at work, and their parents had left early for a church retreat. But his little sister hugged him hard. "Don't let bears eat your face," she said. He laughed. "Only if they ask nicely." The boys pulled out of the driveway just before 9. Caleb rolled down his window and held a peace sign out into the wind. Liam blasted the first chords of Thunder Road and shouted something about freedom. Noah leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes, listening. The pickup was old, its paint faded, and its tape deck fussy. But it carried them out of town like a ship setting sail. 3 friends on the edge of everything, hearts open wide, not knowing they were already being watched by something that did not blink. Their destination was a less-traveled trail near Lake Sabrina, one they'd chosen for its solitude. No cell towers, no park tourists, no parents, Liam had said. Just us and the stars. The first night, they called from a payphone in town before heading up the trail. Evelyn remembered the sound of her son's voice. Clear, excited, laughing. Caleb joked about Noah burning the hot dogs again. Noah barely spoke, but when he did, he said, "We're good, really good." She told him to wear his jacket. He told her she worried too much. They hiked past wildflower meadows and icy streams, snapped Polaroids of each other jumping across rocks, and scrawled their names in the corners of trail signs like they always did. That evening, they set up the blue canvas tent on a slope facing west and stayed up late talking about things they couldn't say at home. Girls, regrets, fears about the future. Liam asked, "Do you think we'll ever come back here again? Just us?" Caleb shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe this is the last time it'll be like this." Noah, who had been staring into the fire, said quietly, "I don't want it to end, but I think part of us already knows it will." Liam pulled out his notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page, June 12th, 1987. The storm hit the next day. It came in fast, no warning, just a distant rumble that suddenly cracked the sky wide open. The wind howled, rain turned the slope to mud, lightning split the trees. By the time people in Bishop realized how severe it was already too late. And by Sunday night, the boys hadn't returned. Their truck was found at the trailhead, doors locked, windows fogged from the inside. Evelyn Foster stood beside the vehicle and said, "This doesn't make sense. He promised." Her voice barely carried above the wind. The search started Monday. By Tuesday, helicopters were in the air. Flyers with the boys' faces were taped to windows and gas station pumps. Hundreds of volunteers combed the trails, calling names that echoed off cliffs and vanished into fog. Caleb's dad stayed out past midnight each night with a flashlight and a whistle, calling "Caleb, Caleb" into nothing. Marcus Reyes quit his job and joined the search, sleeping in his car and refusing to shave. The weather cleared, but the boys did not reappear. Weeks passed. The search thinned. Reporters moved on. And slowly, the world outside Bishop forgot. But Bishop didn't. They became known as the Three, the boys who disappeared. The story whispered at high school graduations and told to new hikers who didn't understand why people placed painted stones on tree stumps or left harmonicas near the trailhead. No one ever really said it out loud, but most people believed the same thing. They were gone, swallowed by the wild. And yet, Evelyn never changed Liam's bedsheets. Marcus kept a drawer full of his brother's sketches. Caleb's dad still wore the old flannel his son had left hanging on the porch railing that morning. Because sometimes, love refuses to move on. It plants itself like a tree and waits for a miracle. 12 years later, that miracle came in the form of a collapsed blue tent wedged between two boulders, just high enough, just far enough, just forgotten enough that no one had seen it until the thaw exposed what the snow had hidden. Inside that tent, time had stopped, and in the notebook they found, warped with water but still legible, were words that would change everything. June 14th. Wind won't stop. Fire's dead. Can't sleep. Caleb says someone's watching the tent. I thought I saw a shape in the trees. Noah's not talking anymore. We hear voices. Not sure if it's help or not. The ink trailed off, like a breath cut short. And for the first time in 12 years, the silence cracked. Not with answers, but with a question that chilled everyone who read those words. If someone was out there, who were they? And why had they waited so long to be seen? It had been 12 years since Bishop had dared to hope. When the news broke, a tent found high above Lake Sabrina, 3 sleeping bags inside, a Polaroid camera, and a battered notebook. People didn't cheer. They didn't gasp. They went quiet. As if their hearts had braced for this moment so long, they weren't sure how to feel now that it had finally arrived. The town's breath, held since 1987, had not yet been released. Evelyn Foster stood on the steps of the sheriff's office, holding a photo of her son Liam, corners worn from years of worry. Her hands shook, not from age, but from something colder. The feeling of standing too close to the past, too close to the edge of knowing. Behind her, Dean Moore sat with his elbows on his knees, eyes hollow. Marcus Reyes paced outside the door, a duffel bag over his shoulder, as if ready to run back into the forest himself. No one said it, but everyone thought the same thing. This wasn't closure. This was the wound, reopened. Sheriff Clay Harrison hadn't aged well. His once steady voice now carried a rasp, his shoulders rounded by time. Back in '87, he had been just a deputy, fresh-faced, full of answers. Now, he barely trusted certainty. But when he got the call about the tent, something in him straightened. He packed his gear, called his team, and headed back into the mountains like a man chasing down a ghost that had always been faster than him. Sarah Jennings rode beside him, flipping through the case file. She wasn't from Bishop, didn't carry the memories, the guilt, or the hushed tones. That made her useful. She didn't flinch at rumors, and she didn't let silence fill in facts. The hike to the site was brutal. Half-melted snow made each step a guess. The air was razor thin. Trees bent low, as if bowing to the weight of what had once happened there. When they reached the tent, no one spoke. The canvas was torn, but intact, pinned beneath a fallen branch. Time had curled its edges, but not enough to erase the shape of the lives it once held. Inside, 3 sleeping bags, 1 camera, a pile of damp clothes, and Liam's notebook lying open. The words written across those last pages didn't feel like history. They felt immediate, urgent, almost warm to the touch. Storms worse. Fires out. Can't sleep. Caleb says we're being watched. Noah swears he heard something. Voices. Not sure it's help or not. Sarah's fingers lingered on the notebook's final page, tracing the blurred ink. The writing had grown shaky, uneven. Not just wet, frantic. She looked up at the tree line. She had never believed in ghosts. But standing there, she felt watched. Back in town, word spread faster than wildfire. People whispered in diners, gas stations, and school parking lots. Teachers pulled old yearbooks from shelves. Neighbors dug out faded flyers. It was as if the boys had vanished only yesterday. Old rumors rose from the dead. The hiker who'd claimed he saw someone wandering near the trailhead that night. The strange lights seen above the ridge. The couple who thought they heard voices while camping 2 miles north during the same storm. Stories once dismissed, now returned with sharpened edges. And yet, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, just damp fabric, broken zippers, and silence. Sheriff Harrison did what he always did. He started a board. In the back room of the station, he pinned maps, timelines, and every Polaroid recovered from the camera. Most were too damaged to show much, but one photo, dated June 13th, showed the boys in raincoats smiling against dark clouds. Behind them, at the edge of the frame, was something else. A shape, too blurry to name, but undeniably there. Sarah enhanced the image, tweaked contrast, zoomed, rebalanced, and there it was, a faint patch on the figure's jacket, circular, frayed, a badge. She circled it in red and handed the print to Harrison. "It's old," she said. "Could be a forest ranger, maybe local search and rescue." Harrison stared at it a long while before answering. Not many people wore that patch in '87, and fewer still were supposed to be in those woods. Meanwhile, the families hovered in a new kind of limbo. They gathered at Evelyn's house, the same one where Liam's room remained untouched. Dust had settled, but nothing else had changed. Soccer trophies still lined the shelf. His jacket still hung behind the door. The cassette tapes he'd made, mostly Springsteen and Dire Straits, still sat stacked beneath his nightstand. Evelyn stood in that room each morning and wondered whether to pack it up. She never did. Downstairs, Dean Moore sat stiffly on the couch, fingers locked. He didn't speak often anymore, but when he did, it landed heavy. "They're not gone," he said. "Not in the way people think." Marcus Reyes, who had flown in from Los Angeles the same day the tent was found, hadn't stopped pacing since. He read the notebook twice, memorized the final entries. He'd lived with not knowing for too long, but now, the fragments were too close, like he could touch them if he just reached far enough into the dark. At the station, Sarah began compiling every ranger log from that summer. Only 7 men had been assigned to the area in June of 1987. Most were retired. 1 had died. 2 lived out of state. All accounted for, except 1. Sheriff Harrison ran his finger down the page and stopped at a name that made his brow crease. James Harlow. He'd been quiet, a loner, known for patrolling deeper into the range than anyone else. Rumor was he didn't like hikers, called them noise in God's cathedral. He had resigned just weeks after the storm. Vanished. No forwarding address. Sarah tapped her pen against the Polaroid. If that patch is from the '80s and Harlow was still active then, there's a chance. Harrison cut her off. "We find him. We ask. No guessing." But even as they said it, both of them knew. If James Harlow had been up there, and if he'd seen something, 12 years was a long time to keep quiet. Unless silence had been his intention from the start. The next morning, the sheriff's team hiked to Harlow's last known cabin, buried deep, nearly claimed by vines and thyme. The windows were boarded. The air smelled of rot and dust. Inside, beneath a loose floorboard, they found a metal box filled with ranger memorabilia, newspaper clippings, and a weather log from the summer of 1987. Most entries were dry. Temperature, wind, trail notes. Until June 13th. 3 boys. Told them not to go past the ridge. Storm's coming. Don't want to watch them get lost. Voices in the woods last night, not mine. June 14th. Still no sign of them. Don't think they're alone out there. Something watching. Trees too still. I don't like this place anymore. The handwriting wavered, darkened, then ended. Back in Bishop, no one slept that night. Because whether Harlow had tried to help or tried to hide, the truth was undeniable now. The boys had survived the first storm, and someone, somewhere, had seen them. By the time Sarah Jennings returned from the mountains with the weather log in hand, Bishop felt different. The air held a weight, the kind you only notice after it's settled on your chest, the kind that makes you walk slower past photographs in your hallway, the kind that turns every wind-blown pine branch into a question. Sheriff Clay Harrison sat in the back of the station, surrounded by corkboards and memories, Polaroids, maps, notes scribbled in the margins of old reports. But the room didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a grave. He picked up Harlow's journal again, fingers stiff. There was something in those entries that disturbed him more than he admitted. Not the words, necessarily, but the tone, the fear. Harlow had once been the kind of man who called hikers trespassers and threatened to issue citations over campfires. Yet in those last entries, his bravado had turned to something raw, something unsteady. He sounded like a man who wasn't sure what was real anymore. Sarah stood beside the board, pinning a printout of the tent site. She'd drawn red circles around the known positions: the tent, the ridge, the creek bed, and now Harlow's cabin. "We're looking at a triangle," she said softly, tapping each point. "Tent, cabin, old mine, all within a few miles, too precise for coincidence." Harrison didn't answer. He was staring at the photo again. The one taken by the boys just before the storm. The one with the blurry figure in the background. Enlarged and enhanced, it was still frustratingly vague. But now, with Harlow's journal, it felt less abstract, less like a ghost, more like someone standing just beyond the firelight. Sarah exhaled. "I think Harlow saw them after the storm started. I think he followed them." "Then why didn't he help them?" Harrison's voice cracked like dry bark. "Why disappear? Why stay quiet all these years?" Sarah looked at him, eyes soft but unwavering. Maybe he tried to help. Maybe he failed. And maybe failing them broke him. Across town, Evelyn Foster stood in Liam's room again. 12 years, and nothing had changed. His soccer trophies still collected dust. His books still leaned in uneven stacks on the shelf. The posters, Springsteen, The Clash, a faded map of the Sierra Nevada, still hung where he'd left them. But now, something had changed. She opened his drawer, carefully unfolded the notebook Sarah had brought her. Liam's handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, fast, slanted left, like it was always racing ahead of his thoughts. She paused on the last entry. "We hear voices. Not sure if it's help or not." She read it again, and again. Then she whispered, "Why didn't anyone come?" Down the street, Marcus Reyes was hunched over a desk at the sheriff's office. He hadn't slept much. He'd gone through every page of Liam's notebook, every entry in Harlow's journal. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice low. "I know those woods," he said, pointing at the map. "We used to dare each other to climb this ridge. We called it Echo Point. You shout, and the whole mountain throws your voice back." Sarah nodded. "Could explain the voices." Marcus shook his head. "No, you don't get it. We used to mess with each other out there. Pretend to be ghosts. Whisper through walkie-talkies, throw rocks into the trees, and claim we saw shadows. But this wasn't a game. Liam's words. He wasn't joking. He was scared." Sarah leaned in. "What if someone else was up there?" Marcus froze. "Like who?" She didn't answer, because the truth was, she didn't know. The next day, the sheriff's team returned to the ridge. The snow was patchy now, melting fast. The trees creaked in the wind like old bones. They hiked carefully, avoiding old search tape markers that had faded to pale ribbons clinging to branches like memories that refused to let go. At the edge of Devil's Shelf, a steep, narrow ledge above a rock outcrop, Sarah stopped. Something shimmered beneath the soil. She knelt, brushed away leaves, mud, and moss until her fingers hit something metal. A compass, small, worn, and engraved with the initials LF. She held it up to Marcus, who had hiked beside her that day. His voice caught. That was his 12th birthday present. He never left it behind. She pressed it into his palm. Then he made it here. All three of them did. Nearby, another officer called out. They'd found a second object, tucked beneath a root system a few yards from the compass. A flattened lunch tin, dented, rusted. Inside, a crumpled photo, Polaroid, 3 boys, wet hair, raincoats, arms slung over each other's shoulders. But their smiles were different this time. Not wide, not bold, quiet, resigned, brave. Sarah flipped it over. Written in Caleb's handwriting were the words, "The adventure of a lifetime." Marcus sat on a nearby boulder, head in hands. They kept leaving signs, breadcrumbs. Sarah looked out at the valley below. They weren't trying to be found. They were trying to survive. Back at the sheriff's office, Sarah laid everything out on the table. Compass, photo, coordinates, the notebook. And something clicked. She spread out the full topographical map, placed pins at each discovery. The tent, the ridge, the hidden cabin, the mine, a triangle, not random, a path. They were moving in a pattern, she murmured, trying to get somewhere. But where? Harrison asked. Sarah hesitated. Then softly, home. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat with Caleb's father and Noah's mother in her living room. The air smelled of old coffee and lavender soap. No one spoke much. But when Sarah walked in and handed them the compass, everything in the room changed. Evelyn held it like it was a heartbeat. He made it, she whispered. He made it this far. Dean Moore, voice cracked with years of silence, finally spoke. Then the question isn't if they tried to come home. It's why they couldn't. That night, Sarah stared at the evidence wall. Every note, every photo, every object. And suddenly, a detail stood out. One no one had noticed before. In one of the Polaroids, half faded, was a shadow near the edge of the frame. Not the same figure from before. This one was hunched, farther back, almost hidden behind a tree. She enhanced, enlarged, adjusted contrast, and there, just faintly visible, was a flash of fabric. A ranger's hat. Not from the 80s, newer. She leaned in, her breath fogging the screen. If the tent had been buried for 12 years, and someone with a modern ranger hat had visited it after the snow melted, then someone had found it before the hikers ever did, and chosen not to tell anyone. The realization settled like frost over Sarah Jennings' skin. Someone had been at the tent before it was discovered. Someone recent. Someone who walked away. The figure in the photo wasn't a memory. It was a witness. Or something worse. That night, the lights in the sheriff's office stayed on long past midnight. Sarah sat alone at the evidence wall, staring at the outline of the ranger's hat frozen in that Polaroid frame. She'd seen that style before. It wasn't standard issue anymore, but it had been used in the early 2000s by a handful of volunteers and legacy rangers who clung to tradition like armor. Only a few still lived in the area. But one name kept coming up. Edgar Lane, a former backcountry ranger turned recluse. Lived alone near the ridge in a crooked wooden house surrounded by rusted tools and vines. He'd been on the original search team in '87, claimed to have heard shouting near the mine shaft The morning after the storm. No one had believed him. Said he'd been drinking. Said he was emotional. Said a lot of things that conveniently shut him up. But Sarah believed in inconvenient voices. So she drove up the broken road just after dawn, gravel crunching beneath her tires, mist rising off the trees like breath. Edgar Lane answered the door a socks, eyes glassy but not unfocused. He was older now, thinner, but there was clarity in him, like someone who had waited too long to be asked the right question. She showed him the photo. He squinted, then nodded. I was up there again. This spring, snow was light. Thought I saw something under a rock ledge. Went to look. Didn't say anything. Figured I was going crazy again. Sarah leaned forward. What did you see? He looked at her. A compass and the tent. His voice dropped. It was too clean, too perfect, like someone had just put it there, like a stage. Her chest tightened. You think someone hid it? He didn't answer right away. He walked into another room, came back with a bundle wrapped in old flannel. Inside were photos, dozens of them, trees, tracks, rocks marked with blue paint, and a hand-carved wooden sign nailed to a tree. Keep out. I found that, he said, nailed just above a patch of disturbed soil. Thought it was a game at first, but something about it felt off. Sarah sifted through the images and froze at one. A map, hand-drawn, weather-worn, and marked with a red X. The date in the corner, June 6th, 1987. The last day the boys were seen alive. Back at the station, Sarah spread everything across the table. Sheriff Harrison looked at the map, then the compass, then back at her. They weren't just hiding, he said. They were signaling. And someone was intercepting the signal, she added. Marcus Reyes was already standing. We need to go back up. So they did. That afternoon, Sarah, Marcus, and 2 deputies hiked to the site marked on the map. The trail was steep, shrouded in pine and shadow, but clearer than before, almost like it had been used recently. Halfway up the ridge, Marcus stopped. He pointed to the base of a tree where the soil had been disturbed. Here, they dug. Beneath layers of moss and roots, they found a rusted lunchbox. Inside, 3 Polaroids, taken from a distance. The boys' tent, the ridge, the ledge they once dared each other to climb. One of the photos showed a footprint, large, heavy-treaded, a match to standard ranger boots from the 1980s. But the mud it was pressed into was too fresh. Someone had walked there this year. Sarah's heart pounded. She looked around the clearing, eyes scanning for movement, for memory, for any trace of breath still lingering. This isn't just a recovery anymore, she whispered. This is a trail of intention. Back in Bishop, Evelyn sat with Donna Reyes and Helen Moore, 3 mothers who hadn't buried their sons, but had lived every day as though they had. They held the compass, the photos, the fragments of evidence like prayer beads, not to mourn, but to believe. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She spread out the evidence on her apartment floor. Polaroids, maps, blue-painted rocks, compass, Harlow's journal, Edgar's photos. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to see a pattern, not just in direction, but in purpose. The triangle, tent, cabin, ridge. But the angles were skewed, imperfect, unless there was a 4th point, something that balanced the shape. She pulled out a new map, traced lines, rechecked elevations, and then, just above the 3rd point, she found it. A disused hunting cabin. last surveyed in 1979, never demolished, untouched, forgotten, or hidden? She didn't wait. At sunrise, Sarah packed her gear, called Marcus, and together they set out. The climb was brutal. The wind bit deep, but as they approached the cabin, they saw it. Wooden slats falling inward, windows broken, roof caved slightly, but still standing. Inside, it smelled of mold and ash. Dust curled in the air like smoke. But what mattered wasn't the structure. It was the wall. Carved into the back panel, just above the fireplace, were 3 sets of initials: LF, CM, NR. Beside them, shakily scratched, June 8th, 1987. Sarah's hands trembled. She snapped photos, dusted the wood. Then Marcus stepped on something soft. A child's shoe. Small. Blue canvas. Too clean. Inside it was a folded paper, ink nearly faded. Saw someone outside. Not safe to leave yet. The handwriting matched the other notes. Liam's, on a nearby table, was a torn map, edges scorched, with a narrow trail marked in green ink, leading farther up the ridge, past any known route, to a mine, a forgotten tunnel. They left immediately. When they reached the sheriff's office, the air felt electric. "This is it," Sarah said, breathless. They were trying to get somewhere, or away from someone. That night, Sheriff Harrison assembled a full search team: volunteers, deputies, Forest Service, Marcus, Sarah, everyone who had ever cared. The mountain was no longer just terrain. It was evidence. The next morning, the group moved out, silent, focused, hearts heavy with possibility. Near the entrance to the mine, Jesse Foster, Liam's younger brother, now grown, froze. He pointed to a branch. Caught in the bramble was a strip of fabric, blue. It fluttered like a flag in slow motion. Inside the tunnel, darkness closed around them. But as flashlights scanned the interior, something shone back. A makeshift shelter. Blankets, a flashlight, and more notes scattered in the dust. Sarah picked up the last one. Her voice cracked as she read aloud. "We hear voices. We'll try for the ridge at dawn." And on the back, in Liam's unmistakable hand, "Tell them we didn't give up." The tunnel echoed with silence, not the kind that invites peace, but the kind that presses on your ribs, reminding you that something ended here, or began. Sarah knelt in the dust, fingers trembling around Liam's final note. "Tell them we didn't give up." Her breath caught, as if the words had reached through time and clenched around her chest. Marcus stood motionless behind her. His flashlight swept across the rock walls, illuminating the remnants of what must have once been hope. A folded blanket, a rusted flashlight, and 3 cracked canteens. Nothing else. No footprints. No signs of where the boys had gone next. But it was clear they'd been here. They had survived longer than anyone believed. And they had been running. Outside the tunnel, the morning fog hung low over the valley. Jesse Foster stood at the mouth of the cave, holding the strip of blue fabric like it might dissolve in his hands. He hadn't said much since they'd found the initials in the cabin. But now, as he stared out into the trees below, he whispered, "They were trying to lead us." Sarah looked up. "What do you mean?" Jesse turned. "Liam. He used to play these games. Leave trail signs, stacked stones, blue marks, little tokens. If he was scared, he'd leave a path for someone he trusted, a code. Sarah blinked. The blue paint on the rocks. Marcus stepped forward. You think this? He held up the green inked map torn from the cabin. Wasn't just a direction. It was a warning. Back at the station, Sarah cleared a table and laid out everything. Maps, photos, compass, lunchbox, notes from the tunnel. She connected each clue like stitches in a wound, tracing the boy's journey not just across terrain, but across fear. The path formed a triangle: tent, cabin, tunnel, but the fourth point was still missing. I think there was another stop, she said quietly. Sheriff Harrison stared at the pattern. You think they made it even farther? I think they tried. They combed through the oldest reports. Rumors dismissed as nonsense back then. A hiker who claimed to hear children's laughter near Devil's Shelf. A prospector who reported movement in the trees above the ridge. A storm chaser who took blurry photos of lights flashing through the fog the night after the boys vanished. And then there was her, Denise Taylor, middle-aged, quiet, lived 3 counties over now. But in 1987, she'd been part of the volunteer search. A nature researcher who had been in the mountains collecting wildflower data the same week the boys disappeared. Her notes had never made it into the case file, dismissed as irrelevant. Sarah called her. Denise answered on the second ring. I was wondering when someone would come. Within hours, she was in Bishop. And what she brought was more than just memory. She brought a binder, dozens of annotated maps, field notes, Polaroids. She laid them out in the sheriff's conference room with methodical calm, like someone who'd waited years for someone to finally take her seriously. There's something I never told anyone, she said. Back then, people thought I was just a flower nerd, but I remember sounds, voices, high-pitched, like teenagers, coming from the tree line above my camp the night before the storm hit full force. I thought maybe it was wind, but she pulled out a photo, trees, fog, and faintly in the distance, something rectangular. A wooden structure, a chimney. Denise looked up. I think it was a burned cabin, one no one ever documented. Jesse's breath caught. We called it the Lost Chimney when we were kids. It was this story, like a legend. Said it was all that was left after a fire in the 60s. No one could ever find it again. Until now. The team moved fast. Weather was turning. They had a narrow window before the next snow. Jesse, Sarah, Marcus, and 2 deputies hiked out with Denise's old map and a new determination. The terrain was merciless. Roots clawed at their ankles. Loose rocks slid underfoot. But after hours of climbing, they found it. The chimney stood crooked and alone, like a finger pointing at the sky. The surrounding earth was sunken, soft. Denise knelt. This ground was disturbed recently, then frozen over again. They dug. Beneath inches of compact soil, wrapped in layers of tarp and plastic, was a tin box. Inside, 3 Polaroids. 1, the boys in scout uniforms at the trailhead. 2, huddled around a campfire, their faces glowing and anxious. 3, inside the tent, holding up their knife and whistle, bundled in sleeping bags, smiling. But behind them, near the tent flap, was movement, a shadow, barely there, but unmistakable. Sarah held the photo close. They were trying to leave a record, for us. Jesse touched the edge of the image. or for someone who never came. Back in Bishop, the news spread like spring thaw. The photos were scanned, enlarged, analyzed. Experts confirmed they were taken in the final hours before the storm. The town wept. People gathered at Evelyn's porch, at Caleb's old school, at the trailhead where laminated flyers still clung like ghosts to the bulletin board. For the first time, the narrative changed. The boys weren't just victims of the storm. They were survivors, navigators, witnesses, and they had been found. But still, no bodies, no bones, no final proof of what happened after the tunnel. And so, for every answer, a new question rose. Sarah stared at the final Polaroid again, this time not at the boys, but at the background. There, reflected in the tent's window, was a faint shape, a figure, eyes caught in the flash, watching. She turned to Harrison. "We've been following the boys' path, but maybe it's time we ask, who else was following them?" That night, as rain tapped on the windows and the mountains disappeared into mist again, Evelyn sat in the dark, holding the photo of Liam and his friends, and whispered, "I knew you'd leave a trail. I just didn't know how long it would take us to see it." The mountain had one more secret left to give. Summer bled into fall, and the light over Bishop changed. Longer shadows, colder mornings, but still no final word. The boy's story was now stitched into the very fabric of the town. People lit candles at trailheads. Kids whispered their names like legends around fire pits. And in every kitchen, there was a drawer, a shoebox, a corner of some shelf that held what little had been returned. A compass, a Polaroid, a boot print, a blue thread, but no bodies, and for many, no peace. Detective Ortiz arrived from the state's cold case unit in mid-September. He didn't smile much, didn't talk much either, but he asked the right questions, and he didn't flinch when silence answered back. He met with Sarah, Jesse, Marcus, Denise. He listened, he watched, and he started over. He wanted to walk every mile the boys might have taken, not just where they were found, but where they could have gone if they'd had one more day, one more chance. Ortiz brought with him something new: ground-penetrating radar, a team of forensic geologists, fresh eyes, and time. They started with Devil's Shelf again. The ridge was steeper than it looked on paper. Cold wind cut sideways even in early October. But on the third day, something registered beneath a cluster of roots, just a blip on the radar, a shallow cavity. Careful digging revealed a weathered metal lunchbox, sealed with wire and tape. Inside was a notebook. Its cover was warped with water, but most of the pages remained legible. The handwriting inside, distinct, looping, belonged to Caleb. The first entry was dated June 15th, 1987. Still hiding. No one's come yet. Liam's getting worse. Noah hasn't spoken since the tunnel. We thought we heard someone outside last night. A lantern swinging. But they didn't answer when we called. Another entry. We moved higher, found a ledge. Might see the road from here. But Liam thinks we're being watched. Not an animal. He won't say more. The last entry, dated June 17th. We'll leave at dawn. Try to reach the old hunting trail. Don't know if we'll make it, but we'll stick together. That's what we promised. At the bottom of the page, in Noah's small, rigid print, just 5 words. If someone finds this, remember us. Sarah stared at the notebook for a long time before she said anything. Her voice broke when she did. They didn't run. They held on. Evelyn Foster sat with the notebook on her lap that night, her hands gentle over the pages, as if she could feel the weight of her son's presence in the ink. She traced the lines over and over. "I never stopped hearing him," she whispered. Ortiz, for all his professionalism, cleared his throat 3 times before he could speak. "There's one more place we haven't searched," he said. "North Slope, just beyond the tree line." The next day, they climbed. The wind howled through the ridges like it carried voices. Sarah, Jesse, and Marcus hiked alongside Ortiz, their boots crunching through frost-tipped leaves. Every step felt heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, but from knowing this was it. The last bend, the last chance. And then something caught Jesse's eye. A branch, twisted low to the ground, had a single thread of blue nylon snagged around it. Fabric, weather-worn, but unmistakable. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his hands. The others joined him. Beneath a thin layer of soil and pine needles, they uncovered a snow shelter, partially collapsed, buried by time. Inside, wrapped in a rotting tarp, were the last things the mountain would give. 3 high school rings, each engraved with a name: Liam Foster, Caleb Moore, Noah Reyes. They didn't say anything. Not at first. Sarah just knelt there, her eyes closed, breathing deep, as if the air itself had finally given up the truth. Jesse held Liam's ring against his chest. Marcus sobbed into his sleeve, the sound small, guttural, broken by a decade of guilt and silence. They found no remains, no bones, just the rings, just the shelter. But somehow that was enough, because it proved what they had always hoped and always feared. The boys had made it to the end, together. Later that week, under Bishop's wide October sky, a ceremony was held at the base of the trail. There were no speeches, no reporters, no fanfare, just 3 families, 3 friends, and a whole town that had been waiting for closure for 13 years. Sarah placed the rings inside a clear memory box, sealed it, and buried it beneath a hand-carved wooden marker. Jesse painted the words himself: "Brothers, always," and above it, 3 initials: LF, CM, NR. That evening, Evelyn lit a candle in her window, and across Bishop, others did the same. Windows flickered with soft orange light. It wasn't just mourning. It was gratitude. They had not vanished. They had not been forgotten. They had endured. The story of the 3 friends didn't fade with the seasons. It became part of the land. Teachers told it to new students. Hikers left tokens at the trailhead. Locals made a habit of speaking their names aloud when the fog rolled in, like a prayer: Liam, Caleb, Noah. Every November, on the anniversary of the storm, families walked the lower trail by lantern light, heads bowed, not from shame or grief, but reverence. Because these boys didn't disappear. They lived, they fought, they left behind a breadcrumb trail of courage, so that others might understand what it means to be brave in the dark. Years later, Sarah would still look at the final photo, the boys in the tent, smiles brave and tired, unaware of how long it would take for someone to finally follow their signals. And she would whisper the same words every time: "You made it. You were never alone."